And bye.
When I found out I was becoming a father, I made myself one promise to love my youth unconditionally and I make nothing happen to her. I try my best to live up to that. Child abuse in Jamaica is a big problem and the case them rise. It's time for everyone to speak up. We know right from wrong. What is right is reporting everything we hear or see. Report all form of child abuse. Just call 211.
Good night, everyone. Or I should say, good evening, everyone. On behalf of the European Union United Nations Spotlight Initiative, welcome to the Red Alert Roundtable, an urgent space for actionable solutions on a very serious and worrying topic: sexual violence, abuse, and violation of our very precious children. No act is more heinous than robbing an innocent child of his or her childhood, innocence, and future. I am your moderator, Empress Golding, and I have the honor of guiding these somber yet crucial proceedings as we join forces to rally accelerated action to save our children. This is indeed a red alert, the highest level in an emergency. And the Spotlight Initiative joins all well thinking Jamaicans in drawing a line and sounding the alarm that we have met and exceeded the threshold for the highest level of alert on the spectrum. Our experts this evening will share more on the horrifying data, the trauma, and the impact. But let me say this: if this trend continues, we will witness repercussions on mental health, citizen safety and security, and economic growth. Today's event, Red Alert, Arresting the Child Sexual Abuse Emergency, proposes a tripartite approach to arresting this trend, focusing on legal reform, effectiveness of the law, and cultural change. Our message today is clear and very, very simple. We must act now. And acting together as a united force for change means that we must acknowledge that one, we are at red alert in a major crisis. Two, we must protect our vulnerable children speedily as if our lives depend upon it, because they do. We must listen to survivors whose perspectives can help us to be more effective. Four, we must be responsible, especially our men. Responsible men must rise up now more than ever. We need you, men. We need you by becoming visible advocates and modeling the change that we need to see. And five, we, the citizenry, must do our part. How? Make the toll-free number 211 known in every corner and digital space, and make a call if you see or suspect a child is being abused. To all of us here at the Red Alert Roundtable this evening on Zoom and social media, please share this live with your networks, right? Make your comments and ask your questions using the hashtags. Hashtag we must act now and hashtag spotlight end violence. And now it is my honor to introduce the person who will open tonight's proceedings at the Red Alert Roundtable. Our guest speaker and keynote speaker is the Honorable Robert Nesta Morgan, MP, JP, LLB, Minister of State in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information. He was formerly Senator and Parliamentary Secretary in the Office of the Prime Minister. Let me get my dates right. Between May 2019, August 2020. Between 2016 and May 2019, Minister Morgan was a Director of Communications at the Office of the Prime Minister. Minister Robert Morgan has worked in media and communications for over 13 years, the last 8 of which focused on social media, strategic communications, and public relations. Robert Morgan is a past student of Garvey Maceo High School and Clarendon College. So if you're from the school, put a thumbs up, all right? If you're an alumni too, put a thumbs up. He's from Woodhall, Clarendon, and graduated with a BA in History from the University of the West Indies in 2004. Minister Morgan has an LLB, as I mentioned, but I'm going to tell you the university, from the University of London, England. So he's well traveled. But I think his most important job, and if you didn't know, is that he is a super dad. All right, put a clap there in the webinar and let's welcome our Minister, Robert Nesta Morgan. Come on, I can hear you clapping. I see the hand claps. Welcome, Minister. Good evening.
Thank you very much, Empress, and thanks to all the persons who are on the panel and all the persons who have tuned in. Just a point of clarification, do I do the PowerPoint now or just the introductory statement?
Gillian, you'd have to help me with that.
That's completely up to you, Minister.
Pardon?
That's completely up to you. You may wish to start off with your remarks first and then a PowerPoint. It's completely up to you. We're here to facilitate you.
Let me not speak at too much length. So first of all, I want to recognize Denise Antonio, UNDP representative, and also listening and watching us as we carry out this program. Other members of the United Nations country team and the European Union delegation, also other distinguished representatives of international development agencies, Professor Paula Morgan, University Director, Institute of Gender and Development Studies, Ms. Tanya Chambers of the Spotlight Initiative, I think she's the legal consultant, Executive Director of E for Life, Ms. George Crawford, Jason Downer, founder of Men of God Against Violence and Abuse, and our very own Mr. Warren Thompson, Deputy Registrar, Child Protection and Family Services Agency. Empress, I don't need to introduce you or recognize you. You're recognized every day. We hear you on radio. Attendees on Zoom and all of the relevant media platforms. I want to thank you for inviting me, first and foremost, to this virtual roundtable titled, very interestingly, Red Alert, Arresting the Child Sexual Abuse Emergency with Strengthened Laws, Intervention and Information. That's a lot. I'm pleased to have your audience today, not only in my capacity as State Minister in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, with responsibility for youth and children, but also as a member of Parliament in a constituency that is home to 3 childcare facilities and as a father. Some of you may remember that earlier this month, I spoke in the House of Representatives and I titled my presentation, Hope for Children. I detailed several challenges that are faced with our children, and also a point that I want to reiterate today, that child abuse, whether sexual abuse or otherwise, is one of the biggest threats to Jamaica today. Over a number of years, both empirical and anecdotal data has been overwhelming, and the implications are extremely grave. I spent the last year learning firsthand some of the very harsh and traumatic realities faced by children in Jamaica. And it was challenging for me to accept that many of our parents and many Jamaicans do not love children. And I pause when I say it, because even saying it, there's a dichotomy that exists in my mind, as we do always speak about how we love our children, and we have songs about children, and you see all these wonderful videos of children. But love is an action word, and the actions that we see a large number, and it is a large number, Jamaicans perpetrating against our children are not love. We know of what happened in Montego Bay with His Excellency, who is a convicted sex offender, who was allowed to interact very closely with children. We've heard of pastors who are charged. One recently got bailed, accused of molesting a young girl. There's also another story today of somebody who's supposed to be a counselor, who was also arrested, is on $1 million bail. And why these people have not been convicted, some of them, I think the fact that there's a charge speaks to a great threat that exists for children. Despite all of these challenges, both within the government child ecosystem and nationally, I remain hopeful. For the last 2 years, the pandemic, while it has exacerbated the issues that children face, it has also spurred us to act. I mean, we could go to data that before 2020, there was an average of 1,200 reports of child abuse per month. Since 2021, there have been about 800 to 900, and that's nothing to celebrate, as the disconnection from the formal education system has resulted in many children not being able to report. However, I'm relieved that we're doing a lot of work to improve and increase opportunities for the positive outcomes of children. Most recently, you would have heard the announcement of the resumption of face-to-face classes for a total of 376 out of 759 primary schools, to bring approximately 45,000 students, that these schools account for some well-needed reprieve. I'm also very happy for the effort of the Child Care and Protection Agency and the ministry in launching the 211 helpline, which will eventually replace 888 Protect. It's the first of its kind hotline in Jamaica, and probably the Caribbean, that is dedicated to report child abuse 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, confidentially and anonymously. And it is geared towards encouraging self-reporting by children. We're also at reforms such as a new Child Care and Protection Act, amendments rather. We're going to repeal and replace the Adoption Act. We're going to repeal Section 24, which allows judges to lock up children in penal institutions without charge. And we're reforming how children's homes are governed. We're very strict on the licensing regime. We're also looking at family place of children below 3 years old, so no child under 3 ends up in a child care facility. We're trying to make recommendations for the provision of the creation of an offense of predatory sexual assault and its incorporation into relevant and existing legislation for increased protection of Jamaica's most vulnerable. And this in particular is to penalize any adult who engages in sexual intercourse or anything amounting to grievous sexual assault with a vulnerable victim, such as a child under 12 or someone with a mental disorder, for which the suggested penalty is a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. I want to close by saying that in a perfect world, all acts of harm against children will be stopped in their tracks. And as the saying goes, prevention is better than cure. But it goes without saying, however, that it's not a perfect world. Nothing beats failure, however, but to try. In this regard, we have embarked upon the many legislative actions. I myself have been out there looking at our childcare facilities, looking at the national mood and understanding regarding the issue of child abuse. The reality is that, as I said before, many Jamaicans do not see children in the way that they should. They do not see them as human beings. They do not see them having independent thoughts and feelings. And in some Jamaicans see children as receptacles of their own pleasure or victims of their frustration and anger. And that's a big part of the reason why we have to ban corporal punishment. Because we have looked at the studies and we see the damage that corporal punishment has done, where it teaches persons that violence is an appropriate means of instruction. And it also has significant long-term impacts on societies, where adults continue to believe that an easy way out of challenges is violence. So I'm going to end there. And thank you again for inviting me. There's a lot of work to be done. I'm not one to come and talk about things that are rosy and nice, because they're not. We have a lot of challenges, but what I do know is that the commitment is there to try and fix these problems as quickly as possible. Thank you very much, Empress.
Thank you, Minister. All right. Are we sharing this?
Leaving school in the evenings, I had to stay with my stepdad. There was another little girl who was living in his house. So it started at 8, where he was having sex with her and I had to sit and watch. So I sat there watching them until one evening he decided he wanted to try it with me. I was raped at the age of 9 by my stepdad. I remember I would go into stores and steal stuff just to get caught so I could go to a safe place. The hardest thing I had to do was actually pretend like I was happy, and I wasn't. I was so unhappy.
Back then, as a child, I was living as an adult. Someone having sex with you almost every night is an adult thing.
Yes, I was 6 when I first got abused. I was molested again by 2 men. He was saying that it's not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt. I felt like I would be a victim for the rest of my life.
Sexual abuse leaves a permanent scar.
When I hear the word abuse, I just think about the bad things. Just think about the bad things.
It's like a family curse. It's like a cycle, because myself, my grandmother, my mother, and my aunt, we all were raped as a child. Sharing my story, it actually helps other persons to open up, to feel free and to feel safe and not feel guilty about what happened in their past. With this, I decided to break the cycle. My daughter, she's my motivation. She's very friendly and kind. I talk to her about my abuse, and she understands that she can come to me about anything. So I've made that choice with my child to correct some of the mistakes that my mother made. Each and every day she motivates me to push forward, to try to end sexual abuse in Jamaica.
I want to be an example. E4Life has opened that door for me.
They care for young adolescent teen moms infected or affected by an STI or HIV.
When I could go to the monthly meeting and share things, I can say anything, the stuff that pile up for the month, I just let it out, let it right out.
I have persons I can just call and talk to. They'll just listen and remind me that I'm a star. E4Life helped me a lot to build my confidence level. I can make a difference in my child's life. I can make a difference in Jamaica and the world.
I've learned to cope with it. I've learned that it wasn't my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. Don't think that your life is over. You got to face the world. I want to move forward.
Mentoring, it's a major part in my life to help them to move forward.
I would say I'm a strong person. I know that I'm a strong person.
You have persons that been abused, but they're not coming forward because what? Their fear. I was one of them.
Speak up and speak out. Your voices will be heard.
My uncle is still around. I just walk past him. I want to let him see that what he did to me wasn't the end of me. I want him to stand there and see the person he hurt. My anger days are over. I decided that I'm not going to let my past ruin my future.
My hope for myself, my daughter, and the community is actually that girls can feel safe, play games, be happy, be free. With the help of E4Life, with the numerous trainings that I've gotten, and becoming a better parent, I will break the cycle. And I know I can break it.
Oh, some resilient young women there. UNICEF, E4Life, thank you for producing that video. When will we break the cycle? When? As you just saw, stakeholders, the video tells the powerful stories of survivors of sexual abuse and how they are being empowered to transcend their childhood trauma to help others. We felt it was important for you to hear the stories as we outline impact and hope. Again, Minister, thank you so much for being here with us. You have a big responsibility, but the good thing is that we're all in this together to protect our children and to prevent this monster from continuing in our society. We must break the chains. A quick fact. The Spotlight Initiative is a global multi-year partnership between the European Union and the United Nations to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. Jamaica represents one of the largest investments in Caribbean Spotlight countries with an $8 million Euro allocation. Participating agencies are UN Women, UNDP, UNICEF, and UNFPA. All right, so I want to introduce the Red Alert panel now by name and organization. I think the minister already did that for me, but I'm going to ask them to turn on their camera for a quick video shot, a gallery shot. All right, so let me remind you who they are. The Red Alert panel is Paula Morgan, University Director, Institute for Gender and Development Studies. Paula, let me see you. Turn on your video. Hi. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good evening. We also have Tanya Chambers, Spotlight Legal Consultant. Where's Tanya? Turn on your video. I just want to do a roll call and make sure our distinguished panelists are ready to tackle this monster. We're going to do this together. All right, so let me see. Who else do I need to turn on next? Oh, my favorite. Well, you're all my favorite, but I love the work that E for Life is doing. And I every time I see this woman, I'm inspired. Joy Crawford, Executive Director, E for Life. Where are you? You have to check in on Joy. You know, she has to be on the front line. Yeah, I have to always make sure that she's okay. Hearing these stories every day is hard. We all need the psychological first aid in the field. So you okay, Joy? Thumbs up. Oh, good to hear. All right, let's go. Who am I looking for now? I'm looking for Jason Downer, founder of Men of God Against Violence and Abuse. Where are you, Jason? Love the work you're doing. Good to see you. Always good to see you, Jason. And where am I now? I'm looking for Warren Thompson, Deputy Registrar, Child Protection and Family Services Agency, the CPFSA, the agency that governs everything. Warren, turn on your camera. We want to make sure you are here. We have some serious work to do at the round table tonight. All right. He may be, oh, there you are, Warren. I see you up there. Let's get him down here with us. Hi, Warren. I see you. All right. So everybody is here. And to all of you tuning in, how many people do we have here today? 103 Jamaicans can change this nation. It just takes this group. This is an army. So let's put on our armor, pens and paper, heart and mind, and let's do this, because I personally, I'm tired. I'm tired of hearing little girls and little boys every day messaging me, telling me about the abuse, and they go through it their entire life and they're broken humans. How can they perform it? They're broken. We have the power. This is the army right here. So I'm really grateful that I can be a part of this and to be in the presence of all of you here tonight to hear your ideas. And I'm ready to jump on the front line like Nanny of the Maroons and do the work. I am ready. So let's get the first panelist up. Paula Morgan is professor of West Indian literature and culture at the University of the West Indies, and university director of the regional coordinating office of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, UE, regional headquarters, Mona. The focus of Dr. Morgan's research includes gender, violence and trauma, crime and its representation in the Anglophone Caribbean, a pedagogical approach to Caribbean literature and culture. Professor Morgan, I don't know if she's related to Minister Morgan, they both share the same last name, just checking, is a published author who has received awards for teaching, publication, and graduate supervision. So Professor Morgan's presentation this evening will be immediately followed by a 30-second video highlight reinforcing the scale of child abuse of children in Jamaica. So I'm going to allow Professor Morgan to address you this evening. Are you ready, Prof?
Ready.
Welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to participate on this round table. This topic is very, very dear to my heart. I work with survivors of child sexual abuse who 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, even 40 years later are still dealing with its occurrence in nightmares, which make it eternally present. So I very much understand the need for this intervention, why it's urgent, and why it has to work. I've chosen to speak with you briefly this evening on cultures of violation, because I would like to counteract the notion that child sexual abuse is an aberration. It's practiced in isolated places. It is done by strange and reprehensible individuals. And while this may be true in a couple instances, it certainly is not the entire truth of the matter. I have to echo your minister, Morgan, who said today that some Jamaicans, and I should say Caribbean people, this is not about Jamaica alone, see children as receptacles for their pleasure or as objects for working through their frustration. The reality is, though, that child sexual abuse goes way beyond individual transgression. It is the outgrowth of familial, societal, communal, national, and transnational relations. It is rooted in assumptions and ideologies and norms. It is traceable to historical roots with its sordid contemporary eruptions. It is connected to race and ethnic stereotyping and class positioning. Child sexual abuse occurs along a continuum of power relations, which includes neglect, excessive punishment, verbal disrespect, and myriad other forms of abuse. It is connected to representations of children in media presentations and in popular cultural expressions. All of this is to say that we cannot relegate this scourge to the margins, far away from decent society, or put another way, far away from us. Although women and girls suffer disproportionately from the scourge of sexual violence, and men are more often than not the perpetrators of sexual violence, even the victim perpetrator category is not watertight. The grim reality is that men as victims and as perpetrators of violence are deeply scarred. This is not a game. There are no winners. So why cultures of violation? Culture constitutes shared patterns of living which pervade societal interaction. It is a system of collectively held values. Culture is learned. It is transmitted from one generation to another. Our culture in the Caribbean is rooted in our history. Caribbean societies have emerged out of a crucible of violence and violation. Violence inflicted by the empowered against the disempowered, which re-emerges in a parallel violence of people against themselves and in relation to their offspring. It has generated wounded and scarred people burdened with grim family and national secrets and intrusive collective traumas and memories. Daily, we live with the legacy of our history's deliberate erection of racialized hierarchies, institutionalization of social inequities, devaluation of the human person, destruction of kinship ties and family connections in the interest of transforming human beings into commodities. A major facet of this included deploying children as productive and sexual laborers. There is, I believe, a connection between these beginnings and contemporary practices, like, for example, giving children away to more prosperous families in which they become unpaid, exploited domestic laborers. And in extreme circumstances, they are poorly fed, beaten, verbally abused, and used as sexual pawns by males of multiple generations within those families. Additionally, within impoverished families, poverty, low self-esteem, and frustration work themselves out in violence turned inwards. Men who seek to erase their tenuous grasp on manhood, their sense of being threatened and undermined in education, in the working world, in the public domain. They work it out by imposing themselves on vulnerable children within their grasp, and therefore they feel that they are powerful, they are masters. And in wealthy families, children can come to be seen as possessions and commodities rather than persons whose bodily boundaries are to be respected. Instead, they are prostituted because children are made to pay with their bodies for the love, provision, and attention that should be their right. Children ravaged in infancy often remain burdened for decades thereafter, ravaged by night terrors, sleeplessness, hyperarousal, safe world violation, robbed of the boldness to explore, and robbed too of any expectation of joy, fulfillment, and the capacity to enjoy sexual relationships even generations after. Children as subjects in formation have meager resources to rescue a shattered sense of self and a shattered worldview in the aftermath of the trauma of sexual abuse. So what then are some of our interventions? I believe that we must understand the complex layering of this problem, and we must acknowledge common responsibility to address it on all fronts simultaneously. We must also acknowledge and undermine the capacity of race and gender and class to work as triangulated markers which fix the value or the lack of value of the human person. We must recognize our complicity in turning a blind eye to the continuum and also to the occurrence of child sexual abuse. There are so many instances of tacit acceptance of sexual abuse in our community. We must recognize our responsibility to protect our children and to affirm their right to be heard and to be looked upon, even though the sight and the sound may not be pleasant. We must insist that the news media adjust the language and focus of its reporting to avoid victim blame and justification of perpetrators. And finally, for this brief engagement, we must deal with the stereotypes that are spread through popular cultural expression. And if perchance you are a creative, you must take up popular cultural expression to be a change agent and to join the fight against this terrible scourge. I thank you so much for your attention.
Wow. Thank you, Prof. A lot to think about. I know at the end, we're all going to come back and discuss some points and look at some action items from the different panelists. Thank you so much again, Professor Paula Morgan. I have my pen and paper out and I am making notes. Drop a comment here in the chat if you are live with us on Zoom. Let me know your thoughts. I see everybody in. Okay, great. All right, so now I would like to play a video looking at the problem of child abuse in Jamaica, some statistics.
Between 2015 and 2020, there were 74,455 reports of child abuse in Jamaica. January to June 2021, 1,203 reports of sexual abuse, 1,465 reports of physical abuse, 2,528 reports of neglect. Report child abuse. Call 211.
Okay, call 211. Please share that number with everybody you know. I'd like to now introduce a feature presentation, which is to be delivered by Tanya Chambers, Spotlight Initiative Legal Consultant, and her topic. Now, Tanya Chambers is a legal and policy specialist who has worked as a legal advisor in the public and private sectors. She has advised government departments, NGOs, and international agencies on the application of law to a range of development issues, typically in the fields of child protection, governance, disaster law, and justice administration in Jamaica and the Caribbean. She has developed or updated several policies and key pieces of legislation, including policies and regulations under the Child Care and Protection Act, the Education Act, and other child-focused laws. All right, so Tanya, let's welcome her with some claps here in the Zoom. All right, strengthening sexual abuse laws and interventions.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, we hear you.
Great. Can you confirm that you're seeing my screen as well?
Yes, and your wonderful picture.
Should I put on video or?
We would love to see you if you can, but if not, it's up to you.
Well, I'll keep it for a bit. If it interrupts the stream in any way, I'll take it back off. Okay, so I'll get right into it. My presentation today looks at the legislative framework, and I'll start by jumping right in because there are several different pieces of laws that touch on sexual abuse issues. And as you know, touching on law is always, I could be here talking for 2 hours. So to squeeze it into 20 minutes, I really have to be very pointed. So let's start off with the Sexual Offences Act, which is where you find most of the prohibitions that one uses to punish sexual abuse offenses. And I start off with a bold statement that our legislative framework is relatively strong. Most of the acts that can be committed against a child by way of sexual abuse, most of them can be punished under Jamaican law, and the letter of the law tends to have relatively high maximum sentences or maximum penalties. So off the bat, it's an offense to have sex with anyone, male or female, under the age of 16. Of course, in our law, we define sex in terms of male penis penetrating a female vagina, but we also have a number of other offenses that can be lumped into grievous sexual assault, other types of physical acts of violence, sexual violence against a child. There's also child-specific offenses such as sexual grooming, sexual touching, and of course, incest. All of that is to be found under the Sex Offences Act. So certainly all of the stories that we heard earlier, the very harrowing stories that we heard earlier, would have been prohibited under the Sexual Offences Act. That's also supported by the Child Care and Protection Act. And there are 2 important additions that the Child Care and Protection Act brings. One is that it introduces mandatory reporting. And of course, the minister and all of the videos that we saw are now promoting the 211 number. The idea that in law, an adult is required by law and under penalty of either imprisonment or fine to make a report if they know or suspect that a child is being abused is a really, really important addition to our legislative framework. It means that no adult ought to be able to hide behind the notion that it's not my business. And the law speaks about both knowing that something is wrong as well as suspecting that something is wrong or that something could happen in the future. Now, while this law applies across the board to all adults, there are a number of duty bearers that it holds to a higher standard of account. And that's usually persons who work with children, and the law singles out persons in the health sector, the education sector, persons who work in a children's home, of course, etc. The other important addition that the Child Care and Protection Act brings is that it forces us to limit sexual exposure in certain specific circumstances, such as by prohibiting children from working in nightclubs or really in any kind of environment that can result in them being exposed to moral harm or moral danger. So by defining these types of issues either as issues that flag that a child is in need of care and protection, or prohibiting employees from treating a child as if they're on the same level of an adult, the Child Care and Protection Act has pushed the envelope in terms of the protection that ought to be afforded to children. Of course, that's supported by a number of other pieces of specialized legislation. I'll pull out the Child Pornography Act, which touches on a range of issues, specifically all sorts of depictions that include children in sexual acts. It doesn't have to be an actual filming, it could even be a drawing or that kind of representation. It's all banned. Any depiction of children being sexually abused, children committing sexual acts, or using children in a pornographic production, or dressing an adult as a child in a pornographic production can all fall under this law's definition of child pornography. It prohibits production, it prohibits possession, so having it on your machines, etc. It prohibits sale, distribution, other types of commercial activity, as well as receiving, and as I said, just having it in your possession. What's interesting about this law is that some of the well-intentioned activities that we engage in, so you see something, a video pops up on social media because somebody has filmed a child in a particularly compromising or engage in a sexual activity. And we are horrified, but because our instinct is not necessarily to formally report, our instinct is to informally report. So horror leads to sending it out on WhatsApp to all of our contacts, posting it on Facebook, etc., etc. And we can unwittingly find ourselves breaching the very provisions of the child pornography law. And really, it points to the need to change our reflexive response to dialing 211 and sharing information in a way that it would be useful to really being helpful to children. There's also the Trafficking in Persons law that prohibits trafficking in children for the purposes of sexual exploitation and has been used to punish other types of exploitation by parents or guardians for profit. So for example, forced begging, these types of activities that leave children vulnerable to a wide range of abuse, all of that is prohibited under the Trafficking in Persons Act. So exploiting children in a way that results in some kind of profit or benefit. And usually talk about either labor exploitation or sexual exploitation. I wanted to pull out one other piece of legislation here. And while the presentation talks about quite a bit of laws, I did want to get into some of the other issues that support legislative effectiveness. So I've been very abbreviated, let's say, in how I'm treating with the laws. But I did want to touch on the Domestic Violence Act. It's important that we remember that domestic violence is not just there to address issues between intimate partners, but the law as it stands and as it will be upgraded soon, does allow you to use the orders under the law to protect children within the home. So you can get a protection order, which can be used on behalf of a child victim of violence to maintain some distance from the perpetrator, to have the perpetrator not come within a certain distance from the child's home, the child's school, from the place of work of an adult, etc., etc. And that can be buttressed by an occupation order, which can be used to remove a perpetrator from the home for a certain period of time, so that the law does not automatically have to move the child who is traumatized into an institution or a foster family, etc. There are measures under the law to remove a perpetrator from the home instead. So that goes to, in a sense, defend my statement that we have relatively strong legislation. And I do propose, and I will propose towards the end of this presentation, some options for further strengthening our laws. But I wanted to start off by saying it's not that we are starting at ground zero. So why then, in the face of prohibitive laws, do we have the kinds of situations occurring, sometimes without the types of consequences that would suggest that children really have the level and scope of protection that they ought to have by right in any well-meaning, well-thinking society? One of the things that I'd like to raise, and it definitely came out in both the minister's presentation as well as in Professor Morgan's presentation, is that you can't touch on laws without addressing the norms that create the behavior that the laws themselves are trying to punish. So if you start only with legislation, so legislation tries to change human behavior, but human behavior comes out of human value systems, norms, things that we accept as an ordinary part of life. I think Professor used the terms rooted in history, ideology, and stereotypes. And so if we don't go into why people behave the way they do, why we, as the minister noted, appear to value children on the surface and in the songs and in at the sports day at school and on the Jamaica Day, etc. But our communities and families hide and cover up really egregious and all too widespread examples of sexual and other types of abuse. This is something that we do have to dig into. So when you have prohibitive law meeting permissive norms, these are some of the situations that you'll have, and they've come out in the vignettes, and I'm sure they'll come out in some of the other presentations today. Too high rates of sexual abuse. The fact that in some years, up to 75% of sexual assault injury patients seen in our hospitals are on 19 or under. Half of all rape victims or survivors are under the age of 18, and that's not necessarily including those who come before the courts as victims of the other offense of having sex with a minor. So there's having sex with a minor, anybody under 16, but rape cases, you also have out of children coming up as rape victims as well. And the anecdotal indication from persons who work in communities and in social services is that the risk has increased under lockdown circumstances. And bearing in mind, our youngest victims are infants, and it's really important to note this because sometimes the reflex response can be, well, what did the victim do to encourage or to engage? So when we remind ourselves that in any given year, victims include 2-year-old kids and 1-year-old kids, etc., it helps to put into perspective that that really isn't the place at which we ought to start the discussion. So to dig a bit deeper, what we tend to find in some of the normative circumstances locally is that the narrative is placing children almost on an equal footing with predators. We engage in victim blaming. So we look at ways in which victims, particularly girls as they move through puberty and start to get older, we look at ways in which they may have attracted or caused or triggered in some way certain activities where we ought to be saying really, the predator, the particularly an adult predator ought to be the one to own the blame. The other thing that happens from time to time in certain parts of our society is that we normalize child sexual abuse. So we have these things that I like to call mythologies. The notion that if a man in particular is providing some kind of financial benefit to a family or an individual, then that automatically means access to sexual relationships. And that is used to cover up all sorts of notions, including the notion that a 40, 50, 60-year-old man can have a girlfriend who is underage. And we use these terms not recognizing that really you're talking about a pedophile or a predator. So these are some of the ways in which we normalize child sexual abuse. There are other strange mythologies like the one that says having sex with a virgin will cure an STI. And those pop up from time to time. The family ram person who, it is acknowledged has sex with multiple persons in their family. And this is acknowledged and known in a community setting without necessarily automatically assuming that, oh, the authorities need to be called in on this because it's a crime just like murder or predial larceny, etc., etc. And the other way in which we normalize child sexual abuse is we hold boys and girls at a different standard. And any girl who starts to, whether physically or in her attitude, etc., mature in a way in which she's deemed to be forthright, appears to lose the cover of protection that the law really provides to every child. So we say we don't treat sexual initiation of boys in the same way all the time. And that affects how the law has developed over time in relation to the protection of boys. So I raise some, let's say, controversial statements, but they're really based on legislative loopholes and little conundrums that we have in the law. The first one, the uncontrollable girl and the big man benefactor. And I put that here to raise the issue that the cases that we have where young girls are having sexual relationships very often with an older person, what we see when we look at the statistics is that it is far easier to bring the girl before the court as an uncontrollable child and have the law deal sometimes punitively with that girl. That's far easier to do than to catch the big man benefactor in action for many different reasons, including the fact that, as I noted before, the law, not the law, social norms require the girl to preserve her virginity and doesn't necessarily put weight on the adults in the situation to be the adults and act in the way that adults ought to act towards children. So the law has made it a little bit easier to bring that girl before the court because she's bad, but it's not as easy to bring that big man boyfriend / benefactor before the court to face those actions. The other little legislative loophole that we have is that certainly within the last 10 years, we've heard members of the medical community, guidance counselors, etc., talk about the fact that it is harder for them to do their job because one of the ways in which we have tried to staunch sexual abuse of kids is to try to limit their access to sexual reproductive information and services. And so we've had situations where doctors complain that they're being told that they can't provide services to persons under 16 because it's the legal equivalent of giving somebody a bullet when they already have the gun. You know, so because of this fear of the sexual involvement of children, we shut down the services, whereas the services can be used as a gateway to help those children to get the kind of help and support that they need. The other thing, the issue of how the law defines rape and defines certain types of sexual abuse excludes boys. And a lot of what we are required to rely on for boys would be the offense of buggery. So this notion that boys are not victims of rape because we've defined rape along gender lines is something that can bleed into the level of protection given to them. And really underlying all of this is that we have commingled and conflated laws designed to protect children with laws designed to punish offenders. We're not seeing them as different things. And therefore, when it comes to the protection of children, that gets buried under all sorts of other social notions of what we want the law to do. So in the interest of time, I think I have a minute or so left. I'd like to run through a few areas where we can strengthen the law, as well as the services that support the law. So in strengthening the law, as I mentioned before, we have a list of duty bearers who are required to make reports under the Child Care and Protection Act. Why stop with health, education, and childcare? Why not have coaches listed? Why not have church workers and church leaders, especially youth workers within churches and communities listed? It's a very important way of saying no space will be susceptible to hiding predators and pedophiles. Strengthening penalties, especially minimum sentences. We have very high maximum penalties, but we've seen in the past that it's possible for somebody to get a minimum sentence that really makes the issue look too small. Separating protection laws from punitive laws, removing the barriers to children getting access to information and services from professionals in particular who are required to have their best interest at heart. Revisiting how we track high-risk sex offenders is something that has come up recently. In terms of interventions, therapeutic treatment of child victims and child perpetrators is something that is needed to break the cycles of violence. Our interventions have got to focus on rehabilitation, on both ends of the spectrum. Because as we see, the issues are often generational. Early detection is very important, as is ensuring that all social workers, whether they're in schools or communities, have caseloads that are realistic. So we need more frontline persons. In terms of police, justice sector, and health sector, we need to ensure that their training is trauma-informed and that they're sensitive to the rights of children. And then in terms of changing our culture, targeted and culturally relevant behavior change communications. We saw some great clips today, but we need to get into the communities where these myths exist and challenge people, not just intellectually, but challenge the values that support a wide range of different types of abuse, which really speaks to how we value children and how we treat children with respect and as persons who require protection across the board, irrespective of even the behavior that they're pushing back at us. So being far more persistent and consistent in our public education efforts, and not just as it pops up from time to time in Child Month, for example, but being really consistent, especially at the community level, and addressing the desensitization that happens institutionally when people face these things over and over and over again. Where do they go to debrief so that they can come back to the problem with sharp eyes and sharp focus? And changing the language of how we talk about these things. An underage girl is never a girlfriend. And boys require the same levels of protection that girls do. So I think I'm out of time and out of words as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Wow, strengthening the interventions. I think we know exactly what we need to do. You've listed it. How do we change the culture? You've told us how. I think my question is, how are we going to fund this as well? You know, when you talk about the caseloads for some of these social workers and the intervention, psychological intervention at these children who are victims of abuse, you know, where do they get it? There's not enough. There are not enough psychiatrists and psychologists, even on the island, I think, to treat the amount of children who have had to face some of these abuses. But you've definitely given us some work to do. I want to know how we're going to fund this. How are we going to fund this? People drop a comment and let me know. Communications, getting these frontline workers, counselors. Boy, we're going to have to import an army to get this job done. But I know that it's possible. And I saw an article, Tanya, I'd love you to quickly respond before I move to the next thing. I saw an article, I think it said man had sex with child. So when you talk about the language and the reporting, and, you know, I think Professor Morgan spoke to that too. We have to be more responsible in the media landscape on what we say and how we, you know, we address this. And I think people should send in an apology when we make these kinds of mistakes. Man had sex with child. A man can't have sex with a child. Am I right, Tanya, or wrong here?
I think some of the more egregious ones is when you see things like, there was one particular one in May this year where it said man kills his 14-year-old girlfriend.
Yes.
And the thing is, she's not a girlfriend. She's a victim. She was a victim before she was killed. And the man needs to be identified as a predator. He was particularly a little bit on the young side. He was only 21, but still, language matters.
Language matters. Thank you so much, Tanya. Apologies, team. We're going to watch this video now. Duty bearers must report. Children need your protection now more than ever.
You're often the first to know, the first to see. In these challenging times, there is an epidemic of violent crime against women and children. They need you more than ever to act quickly, efficiently, with understanding and special care.
We know you would do what's right, 'cause we all have a
We are counting on you. So please, do your best.
for the children.
The host keeps muting me, or I'm muting myself. Warren, I see your face coming up. I don't know, is it your time? Not yet. It's now time to hear from Joy Crawford from Eve for Life, a Jamaican national and co-founder, executive director at the non-government organization Eve for Life, a registered general nurse by training, and her experience spans more than 30 years in areas such as gender-based violence, adolescent sexual health, project management, HIV program development and implementation, and so much more. So Joy, I'm going to ask you, please, she's a counselor, she trains, she coaches, she facilitates. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now hear from the Executive Director of Eve for Life, Joy Crawford.
Thank you so much, Empress. You're hearing me?
Loud and clear, my lady.
So I'll say greetings and salutations to everyone here with me as my colleagues and those who are listening. I'm so happy I did not go after that video that spoke about the work of Eve for Life. I will confess, I was crying. Every time I look at what we have had to do and what we continue to do, it leaves me in two minds. And it brings me to what I was asked to address today, that we must listen, the adult survivor voice. Today, I greet you as a survivor myself of childhood sexual violence. I was not aware of this consciously until I was 40 years of age. When I first spoke about it, I had support. Unlike the hundreds of girls that as an organization we work with on a daily basis. Our experience with survivors is that pretty much over 100%, all of them would have had that first sexual violation, that first rape, that first act of incest before they were 15 years of age. And I think Professor mentioned that. We saw it in the data. Over 90% of these young women that we experience are young mothers having their first baby before they are 17. Too many of them get pregnant as a result of the act of rape. Too many of them are infected with HIV as a result of childhood rape. So we need to listen. And what is it that we need to hear? I had the opportunity just before, when I was preparing earlier, to talk with two survivors of childhood sexual violence. Two of them, both of them actually was incest. One age 9, one about age 12. And the question I asked was, what was it like the first time you told someone about what was happening to you? And of course, interestingly, both of them said it was a disappointing experience. I really was listening for a more stronger word, but both said disappointing. So why was it disappointing? One had told her mother, the other one told her grandmother. And the disappointment was the word that they could use because they were kids. That's all they knew. Now, as adults, they would find a lot greater, stronger adjectives. But both of them felt like I turned to the person who was supposed to protect me. It was the person I thought would have listened. It was the person that one young woman said to me, if she birthed me, I couldn't believe she would not have believed me. That disappointment and that non-listening happens first in our homes. It's happening in our families. In some instances, it's happening with our guidance counselors, who again are supposed to be reporting. One young woman said to me, I wish I had not said anything. My silence would have been much easier to bear. we must listen. And I'm emphasizing this because with all the other interventions that we must do with our laws and our policies and our culture, the survivor is at the center. And when the survivors are not heard, then even some of the work that we want to do, we want to bring perpetrators to justice. We want to have a certain level of advocacy. We won't get it when the survivors are silenced. Either silenced by persons who shut them down by saying you can't tell anybody about this, or I'm going to kill you, or you can't tell anybody about this because you're going to shame our family, or you can't tell anybody about this because you're a liar and children tell lies. If they do not have a chance to speak and be heard, then we have serious and more long-lasting challenges if we are going to address the scourge of childhood sexual violence. The issue of reporting and being heard is paramount. There are other things that are happening when we are not listening. When we don't listen, when we don't create the space for them to be heard, we are not planning our activities properly. We are assuming that we know what survivors want. We're assuming that we know their language. We're assuming what justice looks like for a survivor. And it looks so much different for everyone. If we are listening, we will not set up committees and task force and intervention without having survivors present. We need to listen. We must listen to them. So what is it that they have asked me to do? They have asked for about 4 or 5 things. Survivors are saying, when we are pregnant by our predator and our perpetrator, our laws do not give us any option. Everybody said, oh yes, you shouldn't have an abortion. You need to carry the baby. It is what is. And survivors are saying, how do I tell my child that their father is their grandfather? How do I grow my child and love this child the way that is required? Yeah, you know, our Jamaican girls are resilient. A lot of them say, okay, pregnancy is here, let me go ahead, let me get this done. But the pain and the resentment, the abuse that some children receive from their mothers are ingrained in this. Women and girls who are survivors of rape, and definitely for the ones who are adolescent girls, are asking for the option to have safe and legal abortions. Give them their choice. Do not force them. Give them the information. Give them the capacity to make a decision. When the shoe has to be fitted on your feet, I think people will think differently. It's very difficult for a 14, 15-year-old to stare in the eyes of a child for which her father, her biological father, is the father. They're also asking for long-term support. The government has a number of things in place. The victim support services are there, but we know what they bring to the table is not long-term. I think Prof mentioned it. Being a survivor of rape is a long-term trauma. It goes beyond even if there was a court hearing. Many women, 40, 50-year-old, is just coming to look in the mirror. You're never really fully over it. People get triggered. People remember things that they have buried, and therefore they must be able to access long-term psychological support. They've also asked, interestingly, for parents and guardians to be placed high on the list of duty bearers. Too many of our girls are asking, can I bring charges against my mother? I told her and she did nothing. We have to answer them. We have a culture where we are not listening. I know very recently, I think last year, we had some cases where mothers were charged for trying to bribe, get their children to change their statement. Yes, we want more of that. More Jamaican families need to know that when the girls speak, when our boys speak, and you do not listen, you will face the law. We have to put that in our ads. The duty bearers are those first responders who are household family members. And finally, one of the things that they've asked for is for their vulnerability to be seen as is. A 30-year-old woman who experienced rape is not the same as a 12 and 13-year-old. We need to understand that the child lacks capacity. The child's vulnerability is so much higher. The adolescent girl, her vulnerability is so much higher. We are too often not planning our interventions, our responses, our protection for young people and for children. They need special policies. They can't be held to the same level of generalization that we do. The way that we treat them at the hospitals, the way that we treat them at the health centers, the way that we treat them at the police station, they are not adults. And just not being able to see the innocence and who the children are in our society, who are at the heart of this disease, that we are now saying that we are red alert on. We must recognize that children need. When I heard Minister Morgan says there are Jamaicans, unfortunately, that really do not love children, it is like an oxymoron. It is so true. I hold that this event in particular will reassure the survivors who want to be heard. The fact that I was asked to be here is a great, great thing for survivors, because we want not to become an extinct breed. We do not want the Jamaican girl to continue to be prey to predators. So we want to thank everyone so much for a commitment to keep the survivor at the center of all interventions. Nothing for us without us. We are the survivors. We want more survivors to be able to survive, and not just to survive, but to become overcomers. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Joy, for bringing their voices here today. I'm sure some of them are also here. We want to acknowledge them today, but we need, I believe from this, we really need to quickly review the abortion law and look at it for these girls. I'm overwhelmed today. Panelists, I'm overwhelmed with everything that I'm hearing. It is too much, but I know that this 100 strong army is going to address each and every point made here today. All right, Jason is up next. Jason is the president of Men of God Against Violence and Abuse and host of the radio program Raising Boys and the Journey to Manhood. He is a passionate social advocate and male youth development specialist. He's an ordained minister of the gospel, dorm manager at JC, Jamaica College, and author of the book, Fathering Behind Bars. He's married for about 16 years. They have 3 beautiful children. So we want to welcome him now, because the male voice is needed. Responsible men must stand up, bringing men to the table to advocate for protection of children from abuse. So Jason, we are here. We are making notes, taking notes, and ready.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Empress, Minister, everyone here. Are you hearing and are you seeing me clearly, Empress?
Loud and clear, sir.
Great. No, every time I see videos like the one shown earlier with Eve Alive, sometimes I feel embarrassed as a man, as a father, sometimes as a minister, as an uncle, just as a male, for what we have been doing. My gender, my species, what it is that we have been doing, the damage that we have been causing. And I get teary-eyed, because I have a lot of women in my life, a lot of girls, and it's just hard to take, but it's like we have to catch ourselves and go again and try to mobilize and to let our voice be heard as men. I won't be long, because a lot of information has been shared. I just want to big up Joy Crawford. She has been doing this for a while. And for all the other entities here. Mogava is an advocacy-based organization that exists to mobilize men to play their rightful roles in society, family and society, and to advocate against violence and abuse in any form and against anyone. Yes, there are men who not only recognize that we have a God-given responsibility to protect the most vulnerable in our society, our children, but to speak out, call out, protect, and defend our children from sexual or any other form of abuse. Yes, I said it, defend. I believe that as men, we have a responsibility to defend the vulnerable. We have seen where women and other groups and agencies have been leading the charge. And we believe that we must, and I say we here as men, must equally or even more vociferously challenge our fellow Jamaicans, and more so Jamaican men who are primarily the offenders, to leave our children alone. We believe that if you have been found guilty of this cruel act, you must face the full blunt of the law. There's no two-way about that. There's no compromise. We're not going to if, we're not going to but, we're not going to maybe about it. If you find that you have a particular inclination towards children, seek help. We have heard of the Refocus Perpetrator Program. That's something we hear coming out of the Bureau of Gender Affairs. It will be in the Ministry of National Security. And it is important that while we focus on the victims, as advocated, expressed very clearly by Joy just now, that in order to not have a victim be, we have to find a way to reach these perpetrators, and not just reach them. So while they are serving time, or even upon release after serving time, we have to find a way to treat them, and I use the word treat because it must be an illness. And I hear the minister, the state minister, Ministry of National Security, Minister Samuda, speaking about the whole thing of mental health and how it is that we need the necessary persons in the judicial system so that whenever somebody serves time, is punished, that we have the right persons, trained persons, to get in the psyche of these individuals, to mitigate against what it is that we're having. So we need to do that. So if you find yourself, you're listening or you know somebody, you find yourself have that inclination, be it physical, but more so right now, sexually, whether it be you are a pedophile or you're just a plain pervert, you need to get help. We need to normalize when you realize you have a problem as a man, you need to get help. And help is out there. And finally, if you are listening and you are aware of situations where children are being abused, do not turn a blind eye, my friends, my brothers, because you are just as guilty. And I'm happy, as pointed out by the expert, the legal mind, that if we turn a blind eye and it is found out, that we too need to answer to the courts. My fellow brothers, let us become advocates against sexual abuse against our children, starting in our own spaces, in our homes, in our churches. We have heard the minister mention it a bit, someone within the Ministry of National Security, not National Security, Justice, whichever one it is, as relates to the Victim Support Unit, a social worker, a male, and I hear that he's a pastor as well. He, in return, who should be offering help, act as a support for refuge, you in turn took advantage of the vulnerable. As a minister, I take those things very seriously. And so in our own spaces, home, church, work, schools, Joy mentioned too, where guidance counselors refuse to say much, coaches who at times step across the line, and our chill spots as men, when it is that we're at the sports bar, when it is that we're at the garage, whether it is one knock some domino and we hear certain unhealthy pronouncement that we think is manly, call it out, deal with it. And so we have a responsibility. So let it begin with us so that we can end this whole thing of sexual violence against our children. Bless up yourself and thanks for the opportunity to serve by sharing abuse. Blessings.
Thank you so much, Jason. As you spoke, I said to myself, we need to have a man code, national man code in the early childhood institutions, so it becomes a part of their culture, in their DNA, for men to protect women and children and girls. I mean, it's unbelievable. And it must be a sickness. How do we diagnose it? And I see somebody here saying, do we have, or asking a question, do we have institutions here in Jamaica where men can just walk in and say, I need help? That's a very good question. And maybe we have to take the help to the communities, you know, on a national level. But I do believe that it also starts with education. I see a survivor has sent a note to Joy, and I'm going to ask Joy to just share the note from the survivor or the request. Joy, real quick, could you just come back? Because it really is about the survivors.
Thank you so much, Empress. I appreciate it. Another ask for survivors, you know, what they want to be listened around is the issue of the sex offender registry.
Joy, sorry, I'm just saying, great minds think alike. As you message me, I was saying to myself, we need to look into that. And what do they want? Yes, let me hear you.
On the website for the Ministry of Justice, where it outlines the sex offender registry, one of the clauses, for example, says that there will be notification that if you are a victim of sexual offense and your perpetrator is released or, you know, have done their time and they're going to be coming back into the area, then there's the state has a duty to notify you. None of my population has ever had any notification. I remember one particular young lady, her case had gone to court. The perpetrators were imprisoned to serve a certain number of years. And of course, it was cut short. And she was coming home one day and saw the man in the community. And it was very, very difficult for her. It was like deja vu, right back to square one. And so the issue of how, you know, all the debate that is going on, survivors are saying they want the sex offender registry to be a live document, to be public, that all the clauses in it to be actioned. And so that, again, it is not a document or an act that is serving a perpetrator. It needs to be one that serves victims and potential victims. Too many of our repeat offenders are continuing to repeat, and we hear them being locked up after they have had several. So the sex offender registry is another thing that survivors are saying, listen to us. We want this document or this legislation or this thing, like in many other jurisdictions, to be made available that we can know what is happening, and it may become a more deterrent too. My last thing I say about is that I don't know what is this mystery about the sex offender registry. All that the registry is a culmination of or a repository, because these people are publicly charged and sentenced. So it is a public knowledge in the courts and in the newspapers. So why is the registry a private affair? So that's another ask that we're asking. Survivors are saying we need that extra protection to have the sex offender registry a public space. Thank you.
All right, all advocates, rise up. We have work to do. Thank you for sharing that from the survivors. Again, Joy, I really appreciate it. And I'm just going to say, I don't know if there's therapy for these sex offenders when they are locked up, but that's something I wanted to put out there. Where's the therapeutic intervention? I'm hearing it, but I really am passionate about that, because when they come out, are they going to do the same thing again? But boy, Joy, thank you. Appreciate you. And to the survivors here, we're doing this with you and for you. All right, we're going to change the future together. I hope we never have another forum like this, because Jamaica is going to be okay. We will get through this. Now, Warren Thompson, Deputy Registrar, I would love you to come to the platform right now, please. Deputy Registrar at the Child Protection and Family Services Agency. He's our final presenter, ladies and gentlemen. We are collecting your notes and your comments, so keep them coming. We may not be able to get to them, but we are hearing your voice in the chat as well. Mr. Thompson, how are you doing?
I'm good, Empress. I'm enjoying the conversation. It's
yes,
been good.
we must do our part, and let's go. How do we identify? How do we report child abuse? Congratulations again on the new 211 line.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen just a minute. I'm not sure what. Hello?
We can hear you.
Oh, you're hearing me? I'm not sure. I'm seeing it frozen. All right, so I'll continue. So all of us that girls are predominantly reported as the victims of sexual violence. But we are also very much aware that there is a lot of violence, sexual violence, meted out to boys in Jamaica. And for various reasons, including our culture and the ideas around gender, those reports do not come to us, right? So the call to action regarding child sexual abuse is for the community to pay attention to what is happening to children in general, and not just for girl victims of sexual violence, female victims, but for all children who are victims of sexual violence. There are some things that we can look for in paying attention to what is happening to our children. Just confirm from that you're hearing me. Hello?
We're hearing you. Unfortunately, we're not seeing your screen.
You're not seeing me, okay.
So I'm going to ask if I don't know if you're frozen. I believe that.
Yeah, it's fine. I'll continue. For some reason, Zoom has frozen on me. I'm not sure what's happening. Right. In paying attention to children, there are some things that we can look for. Children who have are demonstrating signs of regression, so they've returned to bedwetting or thumb sucking. Children who express, discomfort being around a particular adult, or children who are fearful of being physically touched. Children whose behavior suddenly changes. So children who are usually jovial, all of a sudden become depressive or seem to be depressive. They may express ideations about self-harm or even suicide. So there's a lot of that that happens. And many of you who work with young people will know that there are many young people that we see who go through various types of trauma and turn to self-harming, whether it's cutting or burning or something else, as a means of dealing with the trauma that they have experienced. One of the things I want to say though is we have to be very mindful of how child sexual abuse, which invariably never happens by itself. There's always some emotional abuse that takes place with it. The kind of impact that it can have on a child's development or the neurobiological development. So there are some things that happen in the brain when children go through sexual trauma. First of all, we know that the synaptic connections are not made, and therefore sometimes we see children in school demonstrating either learning difficulty or perhaps a disability, and the antecedent for that was an exposure to sexual violence or other types of child abuse. In paying attention to children, I think we also need to pay attention to the perpetrators. There are some predatory behaviors that we can pay attention to. So we're talking about adults who love to strike up friendly relationships, let's call it that, with children, inappropriate relationships, who love to give children gifts without reason or occasion, or who would like to touch children when the touch is not invited, or the child says no, or the child expresses discomfort, or the parent expresses discomfort, adults who insist on touching children. So I think all of us also need to be very proactive in responding to the issue. We've heard from the previous speakers that it is a cultural issue. It is something that we need to address in a very comprehensive way. We are looking at cultural change, which is something we know is not easy to do, but it's something that is not impossible. It can happen, even if it takes time. So in order to do this, though, we need all partners to play their role. And when I say all partners, I mean every single person. The Child Care and Protection Act says that all Jamaicans are to report child abuse where they know it is happening, where they know it has happened, or they suspect that it has happened, or they think that it is likely to happen. It means that you don't have to be sure that something that you suspect is happening. All you have to do is have reasonable suspicion, right? You don't have to be sure. So when we talk about everybody playing their part, we mean everybody needs to be attentive to what is happening to the children in their community. When Floyd Green was the Minister of State in the ministry, he had a campaign called Our Children, you remember that one, Empress. And he said that they are all our children. And I think we need to go back there, the time when everybody was concerned about all the children in their space. So what we need are caring citizens, the ones who will say that they are all our children. We need accommodating citizens and institutions. So, children need safe spaces. They need to know who are those persons that they can run to whenever they feel unsafe or they feel that they're in need of care or protection. So institutions need to put systems or structures in place. I know, based on what is happening in the current environment, and I know a number of churches are putting in child safeguarding policies and mechanisms in place. I'm aware of that. Schools are supposed to have systems. The Child Care and Protection Act says that, to look out for what is happening to children and to make the reports and submit them to the Children's Registry where they know that the children are in need of care and protection. We also need consistent training in every quarter at the community level, community organizations, in religious institutions, everywhere. Consistent training on child rights and the responsibilities of adults to protect those rights and to take care of children. And of course, we also need to strengthen professional regulatory frameworks. As Jason mentioned just now, the social worker who sexually assaulted or abused a child and was charged, there is nothing in Jamaica to say that he will be struck for argument's sake, from the role of social workers registered or licensed to practice in Jamaica. So we need to look at what are the professions, the duty bearers, to ensure that there is a regulatory mechanism for them. So there's not just the criminal penalty, but there's also some professional implications. And in fact, Section 6 of the Child Care and Protection Act makes provisions for that a person is charged, even for failure to report, can be struck off the role of persons entitled to practice in a particular profession by the appropriate regulatory entity. And finally, I will say we need responsive citizens. We want all Jamaicans to be the one. And how can you be the one? Simply by calling 211. I'll hand over to you, Empress.
Thank you so much, Warren. 211 is the number. And I'm asking each and every person here to find 10 people, right? That's our job tomorrow morning, to tell 10 people the number, all right? 211, and it's a 24-hour helpline, reporting line for anybody to call if they know of a child who is being abused. That's right. So can everybody commit with me tonight to start there tomorrow? Tell 10 people about the number 211. And I don't know when we're going to follow up from this meeting. I must ask the executives, the UN team here, Spotlight team, when are we going to follow up with our action plan? Jillian, I know everybody's at the UNDP office now telling me to hurry up because they have to beat the curfew. So, and some of you have been asking, where can you see this video? Some of you joined us late. So it will be available on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter on UNDP's pages and JIS. So don't worry about that. You can go back, make notes, and share the video with your colleagues and your family. So I'm going to run a quick video. I'm trying to keep within the time frame. We're 20 minutes over. So I want to play this video from Minister Morgan right now, really quickly. Can the team run that for me, please?
211 is a confidential line dedicated to reporting child abuse. It's easy to remember and accessible 24 hours across all networks. Report all forms of child abuse. Our children are depending on us to protect them. If you see something, make the call. Call 211 and report child abuse.
Thank you so much, Minister. I think he's still here with us. Thank you for being here with us. To all the presenters, I want to thank you. This conversation will continue. We have a lot of work to do. I know I have a lot of work to do as a media practitioner. You know, media shapes minds, and when you talk about changing culture, the media is a very critical area and institution to do the work. So I commit today to keep doing what I can. You know, and as a mom of two, I'm very concerned for my own children. And one thing I can say and add to this is that we have to talk to our children about appropriate and inappropriate behavior so they can identify it when they see it. Because sometimes some children just don't know that it's inappropriate. Nobody's telling them. So we have to really look at the education from the early childhood institutions. And that's my 2 cents here because I have to go. Again, thank you, attendees, stakeholders. I can't take any questions tonight, or can I take one question? Anybody want to ask a question? Quickly unmute. No? I'm going to give one participant a chance to say one or ask one question. So I don't want to leave you out. All right, nobody? All right, panelists, again, oh, you can't unmute. I'm so sorry, Latoya, I forgot. Panelists, are you good to go? Anybody have a final word from the panelists? And I'm reading the comments here. Theresa Gaynor says, I learned so much tonight. Thank you. And I'm asking each participant, what is your action item tomorrow? The first thing is to share the 211 line, and then I need everybody here to create an action list, right? To address some of the issues that we heard today and to act on some of the suggestions and recommendations from our panelists, our experts in the field. Anybody else share the two? All right, good, Latoya, I see that. Again, thank you. Thank you, Minister Morgan, panelists, attendees on Zoom, and everybody listening on social media. Again, 211 is the number to call to report child abuse, and let your children know the number as well. I want to acknowledge the Multi-Agency Spotlight Initiative and all of its partners, the European Union. We do have some representatives here tonight. I think Vanna Lawrence, Program Manager from the EU delegation team, is here as well. I wanted to acknowledge you. Thank you, everybody. Walk good and see you at the next Spotlight Roundtable. Until we can end violence against our children, we need to keep meeting. All right? See you again very soon. And let's do the work that we have to do to protect our children. Thank you and good night.
"211" is a simple toll-free number. It's easy to remember, and it is free to all callers, whether you're calling from digital on a 24-hour basis. So there's no excuse for not reporting child abuse.
No problem, more than happy to assist you.
When a report is made to 211, our officers are well trained to ask some key questions to determine exactly what is happening to the child. When a report is recorded, it is marked with a case identification number, and the officer does an assessment to determine what is happening to the child, 2, the level of urgency, and 3, what entity is best suited to investigate the matter. Our investigating partners include our own internal investigations unit at the CPFSA, the Office of the Children's Advocate, and a number of units within the Jamaica Constabulary Force. At the CPFSA, the cases are assigned to our investigators within 24 hours. They will then go out into the field to do an assessment to verify whether the allegations in the report are true and what actions are needed to respond to the child who is in need of care and protection.
It is confidential.
You can be guaranteed that every call that comes into 211 is treated as secret and confidential.
Police were called to the scene of another death arising from a domestic
Shot and killed his
dispute.
girlfriend,
24
Easy,
hours after
then
her
in custody
this
evening
time,
after
the
allegedly
was
killing his
remorse
wife
of
in St.
Captain
Mary's.
The Spotlight Initiative is a global multi-year partnership between the European Union and the United Nations to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls by 2030.
With a commitment of €500 million from the EU, Spotlight represents an unprecedented global effort and the largest of its kind to invest in gender equality and women's empowerment. Spotlight engages men and boys as equal agents of change. Engaging men and boys is a key piece of our efforts.
The objectives of Spotlight in Jamaica are to contribute to the reduction of family violence against women and girls, and to improve access for women and girls to essential, safe, adequate, integrated gender-responsive services.
211 is a simple toll-free number. It's easy to remember, and it is free to all callers, whether you're calling from Digicel or from Flow. It is operated on a 24-hour basis, so there's no excuse for not reporting child abuse.
No problem, more than happy to assist you.
When a report is made to 211, our officers are well trained to ask some key questions to determine exactly what is happening to the child. When a report is recorded, it is marked with a case identification number, and the officer does an assessment to determine what is happening to the child, 2, the level of urgency, and 3, what entity is best suited to investigate the matter. Our investigating partners include our own internal investigations unit at the CPFSA, the Office of the Children's Advocate, and a number of units within the Jamaica Constabulary Force. At the CPFSA, the cases are assigned to our investigators within 24 hours. They will then go out into the field to do an assessment to verify whether the allegations in the report are true and what actions are needed to respond to the child who is in need of care and protection.
It is confidential.
You can be guaranteed that every call that comes into 211 is treated as secret and confidential.